Welcome back to Development Book Club. Today we continue with Lovingkindness, and we'll be speaking about working with the heart, specifically breaking open the loving heart and developing a compassionate heart. We begin with breaking open the loving heart. And this chapter, chapter 6, repeatedly focuses and returns to the connection of all things, and that there's this illusion or delusion of separateness, that whenever we're experiencing that we're experiencing delusion. We can choose to transform our minds so that they embody love, or we can allow them to develop habits and false concepts of separation. So again, the separateness and the idea of concepts comes up again and again in this chapter. There's also a connection that the author finds with breaking open the loving heart and sitting still. I like to read the book so far is full of really cool stories, of which one I will read to you right now. On page 90. It said, "There was a man so displeased by the sight of his own shadow and so displeased by his own footsteps that he was determined to get rid of both of them, to ease his displeasure. The method he hit upon was to run away from them. So he got up and ran, but every time he put his foot down, there was another step, while his shadow kept up with them without the slightest difficulty. He attributed his failure to the fact that he was not running fast enough. So he ran faster and faster without stopping until finally he dropped dead. He failed to realize that if he merely stepped into the shade, his shadow would vanish. And if he sat down and stayed still, there would be no more footsteps." And the idea here, that being still in meditation reveals a significant truth, the truth of our life. And this chapter again returns to concepts and how this can we conceptualize or intellectualize our experience, but it's not our actual experience. And there's a really nice, one more image I'd like to read to you all from this chapter about sort of a metaphor of a playhouse. And this is this. Being free from concepts is like going backstage in a theater and suddenly realizing how much of our engagement with the drama of our lives has come from mere appearances. The costumes, the makeup, the staging, the lighting, and actors projecting artificial personae. It is liberating to realize that we are in effect making it all up. We're playing on the stage set, lost in the costumes and the lighting. We are creating boundaries and divisions according to our histories, our fears, our needs, stories, and our habits. But what is the substance of these boundaries? Where can they be found in truth? The Buddha taught his students to develop a power of love so strong that the mind becomes like space, it cannot be tainted. If someone, for example, throws paint, it is not the air that will change color, but only the walls, the barriers to space that can be affected by the paint. The air itself remains unaffected. And finally, sort of summarize the first chapter here, the critical moment of the path, which breaks open the loving heart, is the realization that we have never existed as separate, isolated beings, ever. When wisdom recognizes our oneness and sees all of our interconnectednesses, of all beings, it fills us with a degree of happiness that will transform our lives. Now I move on to chapter 7, developing the compassionate heart. The first thing she talks about how was the general sort of assertion that compassion is weakness. And she disagrees with that, of course. It's not all weak. It is the strength that arises out of seeing the true nature of suffering in the world. Literally translated from Pali, again, karuna with a K, K-A-R-U-N-A, compassion. This means, check this, expressing the trembling or quivering of the heart in response to a being's pain. And in English also, think of calm and passion, calm being with. Passion is suffering. If you think of like that Mel Gibson movie, The Passion of the Christ, is the suffering of the Christ. It's suffering with another. And the way of developing a compassionate heart, sort of like there's two steps, right? So the first one is to acknowledge pain or suffering. And this is the Buddha's first noble truth, the existence of suffering. how much do we deny or hide pain as a society? She talks about, the proliferation of painkillers and us having special institutions to hide people who are in chronic pain away from us. Step one is admitting that there's pain and acknowledging it. Step two is really opening to it. So opening up to the pain and establishing an appropriate relationship to it. And as we open up to suffering, we have to look at what is happening, what's going on, and the conditions that give rise to it. And I believe this is the second noble truth, which is the coming into being of suffering, or the dependent origination is the fancy term there. We do not necessarily have to make the pain go away. We can simply acknowledge it and then relate with it. It doesn't have to be this aversion, which is, again, a large cause of suffering. Thanks for tuning in, and we will continue next time actually we talked about the Brahma Viharas, the four of them, of which METTA is one, and we're going to compare and sort of look at how they all interact together next time.